My name is Leora, and I'm 38 years old, and my family thought I was too weak to make my own decisions. It's a strange thing, being underestimated by the very people who should know you best. My siblings, my aunts, my cousins, they had watched me grow up, seen me through hardships, yet somewhere along the way they decided I wasn't capable of steering my own life. Part of it, I suppose, came from my quiet nature. I was never the loud one in the room. My sister Verity could command attention with a laugh, my brother Nolan with a raised eyebrow and sharp remark. I was the one who listened more than I spoke, who preferred reflection to argument. But silence, in their eyes, became weakness. They decided I wasn't fit to choose. It started small. Family dinners where my opinions on restaurants were brushed aside. Oh, Leora doesn't care, she'll go wherever. Vacation planning where I wasn't asked, because Leora just goes with the flow. But over time, it grew sharper. When my parents passed and decisions about the estate loomed, the tone shifted. You're too sentimental, you can't think clearly. You're too soft-hearted, you'll make the wrong call. And finally, the one that lodged deep in my chest. You're too weak to decide. I replayed that phrase over and over again, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. Weak. As though the years I had spent working, paying bills, caring for our parents in their final days, meant nothing. As though my silence equated to incapacity. The irony was bitter. I had been the one by my mother's side when she couldn't lift herself from bed. I had been the one navigating the bills, arguing with insurance companies, keeping the household afloat. Nolan flew in for the funeral. Verity called once a week, but I lived it. And yet they looked at me with pity in their eyes and scorn in their voices. Maybe, in the beginning, I let them. It was easier to let Verity make the speeches, to let Nolan cut the checks, to let my cousins make noise while I kept the peace. For years I played that role, convincing myself that being overlooked meant I was being selfless. That being invisible was noble. But grief changes you. When my parents passed, I stood in their house surrounded by memories. The kitchen where my mother taught me to bake, her hands guiding mine as I kneaded dough. The study where my father corrected our homework, his red pen tapping the page until we got it right. The front porch where they'd sit in the evenings, watching the world go by together. Every corner of that house carried their spirit. And suddenly, my siblings weren't talking about memories. They were talking about money. Sell it while the market's hot, Nolan said, tapping numbers into his phone. Think what we could do with the money, Verity added, her eyes shining with visions of trips and luxuries. They barely looked at the house, barely breathed it in. When I objected, they laughed. Leora, you're too attached. You can't handle this. You're too weak to decide. That was the moment something inside me hardened. For years, I had let their words define me. I had bowed my head, swallowed my thoughts, and told myself I was keeping the peace. But now I saw their dismissal clearly not as protection, but as control. They didn't want me to decide because they wanted to decide for me. They wanted to strip away my voice so their voices were the only ones that mattered. I went home that night, my heart aching, and sat in the living room surrounded by silence. Their words echoed through the walls. Too weak, too weak, too weak. But then another memory rose up, stronger. My father's voice, steady and sure. Leora, strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, strength is the decision no one else dares to make. I closed my eyes, clutching that memory like a lifeline. Maybe they couldn't see it yet. Maybe they never had. But I wasn't weak. I was patient. I was thoughtful. I was deliberate. And when the time came, I would show them just how strong I could be. I didn't know then exactly what form my decision would take. I only knew one thing for certain. The next time they told me I was too weak, I would prove them wrong. But the moment they called me weak, something inside me hardened. It wasn't the first time they doubted me. The sting of being called weak wasn't new. That label had followed me for as long as I could remember, whispered at first, then spoken openly once they realized I never fought back. When I was 12, Verity told me I was too timid to ride the roller coaster at the county fair. She laughed when I hesitated. And though I eventually climbed aboard and screamed through the drops, she told everyone afterward that I had almost chickened out. That story became a family joke, repeated year after year until it was the only part of that day they remembered. When I was 16, Nolan convinced our parents not to let me take the old station wagon out on my own. "She's too nervous to drive alone," he said. I had passed my test, earned my license, but his words carried weight, and I ended up chauffeured for months while he drove wherever he pleased. By the time I was an adult, the pattern was cemented. Decisions about vacations, family dinners, holidays, I was always left out. If I voiced an opinion, it was dismissed as too cautious or too emotional. Eventually, I stopped offering opinions at all. But the real fracture came later. When my father had his first stroke, I was the one who moved into the house to help care for him. I managed medications, cooked meals, kept the house clean. Verity breezed in with flowers and long sighs about how difficult it must be for you, then left after an hour. Nolan came by once a week, pacing through the house as though the walls themselves reminded him of responsibility he didn't want. Still, when hospital bills arrived and decisions needed to be made, it wasn't me they trusted. They huddled together, whispering about what was best, while I sat silently nearby, waiting for them to turn and include me. They didn't. When I asked a question, Nolan waved me off. "Don't worry, Leora, you're too close to this to see clearly." Too close, too weak, too much. Every word chipped away at me until I barely recognized myself. I had been reduced to a helper, a bystander in my own family's story. And yet I stayed. I stayed because someone had to. I stayed because love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant silence. But silence had a cost. By the time my parents passed, my siblings were so used to overriding me that they didn't even pretend to consult me. They assumed I'd bend, that I'd nod along, that I'd play the same role I always had. "Sell the house," Nolan said briskly. "It's too much for you," Verity chimed in. "You don't need the burden." They didn't ask what I wanted. They didn't consider that the house meant more to me than bricks and wood. They didn't think of the nights I stayed up nursing our father, or the mornings I sat with our mother when her hands trembled too much to hold a cup. They thought only of convenience. And when I dared to push back, when I dared to say I wanted to keep it, the smirks came, the sighs, the familiar, cutting dismissal. "You're too weak to decide." The words echoed like a sentence passed down by a judge. Final. Unarguable. But I knew better. I remembered every meal I had cooked, every bill I had paid, every hour I had worked to keep things afloat when they were nowhere to be found. Weakness wasn't in me. Weakness was in them, their inability to sacrifice, to endure, to hold on to something greater than themselves. The problem was, they didn't know it yet. As I sat in my parents' house, their voices still echoing in my head, I thought back to the roller coaster, the car keys, the hospital rooms. Every slight, every dismissal, every time they told me I wasn't strong enough, it had all built to this moment. This wasn't the first time they doubted me, but it would be the last. This time, I decided, would be different. The decision they tried to deny me was about the house. My parents' house wasn't just walls and a roof, it was the heartbeat of our family. A 2-story brick home at the edge of town, with ivy climbing the walls and creaky wooden steps that sang with every footfall. It was where birthdays were celebrated, where storms were weathered, where secrets were whispered late at night. After the funeral, when the paperwork was finally pulled out, it was clear that ownership was complicated. Technically, the house had been left to all three of us, Nolan, Verity, and me. But it was also clear that my parents expected us to agree together on what to do. Nolan immediately pushed for selling. He spread spreadsheets across the dining room table, rattling off numbers as though profit were the only language we could speak. "The market's hot. We'll get a great return if we sell now." "It's the smart move." Verity nodded eagerly. "Think of the freedom, Leora. No more worrying about upkeep, taxes, repairs. You could finally move into a condo, live a little, stop chaining yourself to memories." Their words were sharp but dismissive, as though I were a child clinging to a broken toy. But when I looked at the house, I didn't see numbers or burdens. I saw my mother's rose garden blooming along the fence line. I saw the marks on the doorframe where our heights had been penciled in year after year. I saw the kitchen table where my father once stayed up late helping me solve algebra problems I never thought I'd understand. The house wasn't a chain, it was a legacy. I don't want to sell, I said firmly, though my voice trembled. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then came the laughter. Oh, Leora, Verity sighed, patting my hand as though soothing a child. You always were too sentimental. Exactly, Nolan added. You can't let emotion drive a decision like this. You'll only make things worse, I bristled. I've lived here for years. I took care of Mom and Dad here. I know what this house means. And that's the problem, Nolan snapped. You're too close to it. You're weak when it comes to things like this. You can't see clearly. That word again. Weak. It hit me like a slap. But I didn't back down. Weak doesn't mean wrong. I want to honor what this house stands for. I want to preserve it, not turn it into a quick sale. Nolan leaned back in his chair, smirking. You don't get to make this decision alone. Verity chimed in, her tone falsely sweet. We're just looking out for you. You can't handle something this big. My jaw clenched, heat rising in my chest. They weren't looking out for me, they were looking out for themselves. They wanted money, convenience, and freedom, and if that meant bulldozing my feelings, so be it. But as their words echoed in my ears, something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling, I felt steadier. Their dismissal didn't make me doubt myself this time, it made me certain. They thought I was too weak to decide. But I knew I was the only one willing to make the right decision. I didn't want money. I didn't want convenience. I wanted the house to remain what it had always been, the heart of our family. I'm not selling, I said again, this time without a tremor. They exchanged looks, the kind siblings share when they believe they've outsmarted the youngest. Nolan shook his head, chuckling under his breath. Verity leaned back, sighing dramatically as though my stubbornness were just another problem for them to solve. Fine, Nolan said at last, his tone edged with condescension. If you won't see reason, then we'll just have to make the decision for you. And there it was, the truth laid bare. They didn't want my opinion because they never saw it as valid. They didn't want compromise because compromise required respect. They wanted control. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. My hands shook, not from fear but from anger. No, I said firmly. You won't decide for me this time. Not about this. They stared, startled for a moment by the steel in my voice, but then Nolan smirked again, leaning back in his chair. We'll see. But weakness wasn't what I carried resolve. Every corner of the house held a memory. After that heated conversation, I wandered through the house alone, each step echoing louder than usual against the hardwood floors. Nolan and Verity had stormed out, muttering about practicality and profit, but their voices no longer filled the space. For the first time in weeks, the house was mine again. I paused in the kitchen, running my hand across the counter where my mother used to knead bread. The marble was cool beneath my fingers. But in my mind, I could still feel the warmth of her hands guiding mine when I was small. Patience. Leora, she would say. The dough needs time. Just like people. I smiled through the ache in my chest. In the living room, the old fireplace stood as proudly as ever. I remembered huddling in front of it during snowstorms, my father reading aloud while we sipped cocoa. His voice had been steady and commanding, but when he looked at me, there was always gentleness in his eyes. He never once called me weak, he called me thoughtful, careful, strong in ways that didn't shout. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood announcing my presence. At the top, I stopped at the doorframe where faint pencil marks still lined the wood. Our heights, year after year, etched into the house itself. Nolan had always been tallest, Verity proudest of her delicate frame. Mine was the last mark, drawn, just before I turned 18. I traced it with my fingertip, remembering the way Dad ruffled my hair and said, "Not just taller, but wiser too." Tears blurred my vision. How could they talk about selling this place as if it were nothing more than property? As if walls could be priced and memories boxed away? I walked into my old bedroom, smaller than I remembered. The wallpaper had faded, the corners gathering dust, but I could still see the outlines of posters I'd hung as a teenager. I remembered lying awake at night, listening to the comforting sounds of my parents talking downstairs. That house had held me through heartbreaks, failures, and victories alike. Down the hall was the study, lined with shelves sagging under the weight of old books. My father's red pen still lay in a drawer, the ink long dried but the cap cracked from use. I picked it up, holding it in my hand, imagining the countless essays he had marked, the lessons he had given. He had always believed in me, even when no one else did. Every room was alive with echoes. My mother's laughter, my father's lessons, the warmth of dinners, the comfort of safety. And yet Nolan and Verity wanted to erase it all. They wanted to cash it in, reduce it to numbers on a page. I stood in the center of the hallway, anger swelling inside me like a storm. They said I was too weak to decide, but weakness was selling our legacy for profit. Weakness was walking away from responsibility. Weakness was choosing convenience over love. I walked back downstairs and stood at the front door, looking out over the porch where my parents used to sit in the evenings. The wooden swing creaked slightly in the wind, and I could almost see them there, my father with his arm around my mother, both of them watching the sun set with contentment. That porch had been their throne, this house their kingdom. And they had trusted me, whether Nolan and Verity acknowledged it or not. I whispered into the quiet air, "I won't let them take you." The house seemed to breathe with me, its silence no longer heavy but reassuring. I wasn't standing in empty rooms, I was standing in the heart of my family. That night, I pulled out a journal and began writing down everything this house meant to me. Every memory, every lesson, every tradition tied to these walls. It wasn't just sentiment, it was history. And history deserved to be protected, not sold off like scrap. I knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Nolan was ruthless, Verity manipulative, and together they had a way of steamrolling over anyone who resisted. But as I wrote, I realized I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I felt clarity. This house wasn't just mine to love, it was mine to defend. And I would. And I knew then, I wouldn't let them strip this house from me. Their words stung more than I wanted to admit. Nolan and Verity didn't waste time. Barely a week after our argument, they were back at the house, this time with paperwork in hand. Nolan marched into the dining room like it was his personal boardroom, spreading contracts across the table with a practiced flick of his wrist. Verity followed close behind, her heels clicking sharply against the wood floors, her voice coated with saccharine sweetness that only thinly veiled her contempt. "Look, Leora," Nolan began briskly. "We've thought it over. And this is the best option for everyone. We sell, we split the profit 3 ways, and we all move on with our lives. It's simple, efficient, practical." Verity leaned in, her perfume overwhelming, her tone dripping with false concern. "Darling, we know this house means a lot to you. But you have to think realistically. It's falling apart. The maintenance alone will eat you alive. You're not strong enough to manage it." There it was again, that word. Not capable. Not prepared. Weak. I glanced at the stack of papers, my stomach twisting. Contracts for sale. Agreements already drawn up as though my signature were a formality. As though my voice had never mattered. "I told you," I said firmly, "I'm not selling." Nolan laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the room. "You don't know what you're saying. You're clinging to nostalgia. This is business, Leora, and you're too emotional to handle it." Verity placed a hand on my arm, tilting her head as if speaking to a child. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to protect you. You've always been fragile, sensitive. This isn't the kind of burden you can handle alone." My chest burned, part fury, part humiliation. For years I had let these words wash over me, had accepted their image of me as the quiet one, the weak one. But now those words felt different. They weren't truths. They were weapons. And I refused to let them pierce me anymore. I pushed the papers back across the table, my hands steady. "I don't need your protection. I don't need you to decide for me. This house isn't just property, it's family, and I won't let you erase it. Nolan's expression hardened. Then you're making a mistake. And don't say we didn't warn you when it all falls apart. They gathered their things with a flurry of frustrated movements. Nolan stuffing the papers back into his briefcase. Verity adjusting her coat with a huff. At the door, she paused, looking back at me with that same pitying expression I'd grown to despise. You're going to regret this, Leora. You always do. When the door closed behind them, I sank into a chair, my whole body trembling. Not from fear this time, but from rage. Their words echoed through the empty rooms, weak, fragile, sentimental, emotional. They thought repeating those labels enough times would make them true, but they were wrong. I sat there until the sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the floor, and slowly, a new thought began to take shape. If they wanted to strip me of my voice, I would find another way to make it heard. If they wanted to paint me as weak, I would show them strength in a language they couldn't ignore. The law. My parents had trusted me more than they realized. I remembered my father's careful planning, his insistence on keeping records and documents in order. Somewhere, I knew, the truth of his intentions was written down. If I could find it, I could prove not just to Nolan and Verity, but to anyone, that I was capable. That night, I began searching. Old filing cabinets, drawers stuffed with folders, boxes of papers stacked in the attic. I poured through every sheet, my hands covered in dust, my heart pounding with determination. And when I stumbled across the folder with my name on it, neatly written in my father's steady hand, I knew I had found what I was looking for. Inside were documents, deeds, and letters. Proof that I wasn't just a bystander, proof that my voice mattered. I pressed the folder to my chest, a fierce, almost defiant smile tugging at my lips. If Nolan and Verity wanted to keep calling me weak, let them. Because soon I'd show them just how wrong they were. And so I started planning in secret. I turned to someone who would actually listen, a lawyer. The folder I'd discovered with my name on it felt heavier than any burden my siblings accused me of being too weak to carry. Inside were pages yellowed with age but sharp with authority, property deeds, stock certificates, even a handwritten letter from my father reminding me to guard what matters most. I read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. He hadn't trusted Nolan or Verity with this responsibility. He had trusted me. But trust alone wasn't enough. I needed to understand what it meant in legal terms. My siblings thrived on bluster and arrogance. If I wanted to stand against them, I had to meet them not with emotion but with proof. So I made an appointment with a lawyer. His office was downtown, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books that smelled faintly of leather and dust. The man himself, Mr. Roland Ashford, was in his early 60s, with silver hair combed neatly back and glasses perched low on his nose. He welcomed me in with a firm handshake that eased some of the tension in my chest. "What brings you to me, Mrs. Leora?" he asked, his voice even and calm. I slid the folder across his desk, my fingers reluctant to let go. "These belong to my parents. I need to know what they mean and if they can protect this house." He opened the folder, adjusting his glasses, and began leafing through the documents. His brow furrowed, then lifted, then settled again in careful concentration. I sat on the edge of my chair, watching every flicker of his expression as if it were a map leading me to safety. Finally he looked up. "Your father was very deliberate. This deed," he tapped the paper with a pen, "names you as the sole owner of the house, effective upon both your parents' passing. There's no ambiguity here. Legally, this property is yours. Not your brother's, not your sister's, yours." My breath caught. "Mine?" He nodded. "Entirely. The law is clear." I swallowed hard, a rush of relief flooding through me. All those years of being told I couldn't decide, that I was too weak to handle responsibility, and yet, here it was in black and white. My parents had entrusted me with everything they had built. "And these?" I asked, pointing to the stock certificates. Mr. Ashford studied them for a moment, then gave a small smile. "These make you the majority shareholder in the family's small business. You hold controlling interest. Which means, in plain language, no decision can be made without your consent." I sat back in the chair, the weight of his words pressing down on me, not as a burden but as a mantle. My parents hadn't seen me as weak. They had seen me as strong enough to carry everything. I thought of Nolan's smug grin, Verity's pitying tone, too weak to decide. If only they knew. Mr. Ashford leaned forward, folding his hands. Have you discussed this with your siblings yet? I shook my head. Not yet. Every time I try to speak, they laugh. Or talk over me. Or decide for me. They won't listen. He gave a small, knowing nod. Then don't try to make them listen. Show them. The law doesn't depend on their approval. It depends on evidence, witnesses, and signatures. Witnesses? I repeated. Precisely. If you want your decision to stand beyond any doubt, you make it official. Bring in a notary, have your lawyer present, and invite witnesses who can testify. When you declare your choice with proper documentation, there's nothing they can do to dismiss it. Their words won't matter anymore. The idea struck me like a lightning bolt. All my life, my family's voices had drowned mine out. But if I spoke with the law behind me, with witnesses present, they couldn't ignore me. They couldn't call me weak. I left his office that day with the folder clutched tightly to my chest, my heart pounding not with fear but with determination. I had been given the tools. I had been given the truth. Now it was time to wield them. That evening, I spread the documents across my desk at home. My father's signature gleamed at the bottom of the deed, steady and strong. My mother's name sat beside it, graceful but firm. Their handwriting was a promise, a declaration that they had seen me, believed in me, trusted me. I whispered into the quiet room, I won't fail you. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful. If they wanted proof of my strength, I would give it to them. I began gathering my evidence. The folder from my father and Mr. Ashford's words became the cornerstone of my resolve. For once, I wasn't just clinging to memories or emotions, I had proof, written and notarized, that I wasn't weak, sentimental, or fragile. I was the rightful heir, the decision-maker. But knowing I had the power and showing it to my family were two very different things. So I began preparing quietly. The first step was organizing every scrap of evidence. I bought a binder with sturdy dividers and slipped each document into protective sleeves. The deed came first, bold and indisputable. Then the stock certificates, each one bearing my name. I added the handwritten letter from my father, not because it carried legal weight but because it carried heart. It reminded me of why I was doing this, not for money or pride, but for love of the home they had built. At night, after long days at work, I sat at my desk reviewing everything. I read and reread the fine print until the words blurred. I made copies, filed them neatly, and labeled every section. I wanted no loopholes, no room for Nolan's arguments or Verity's dramatics. The second step was witnesses. Mr. Ashford had explained that strength wasn't just in the decision itself, it was in making it undeniable. So I thought carefully about who to invite. There was Aunt Celeste, my mother's sister, who had always admired the way I cared for my parents. She had seen firsthand the nights I stayed by their bedside, the mornings I rose early to manage the house. I knew she would stand by me. There was also Mr. Carter, our longtime neighbor, who had lived next door since I was a child. He'd helped my father repair the roof, had shared countless meals with us, had watched me shoulder responsibilities while Nolan and Verity were absent. His word carried quiet authority. And finally, there was Mr. Ashford himself. His presence would be the seal, the professional, the authority, the man whose calm voice could cut through any bluster. I contacted each of them discreetly, explaining only that I needed their presence when I declared my decision. None asked for details. Each one agreed without hesitation. The third step was timing. I knew Nolan and Verity wouldn't stop pressing me. They'd show up again soon, contracts in hand, smirks on their faces, ready to bulldoze me into compliance. They were predictable in that way, so I decided to use that predictability to my advantage. The next time they demanded my answer, I would give it to them, but not alone, and not in silence. In the weeks leading up to it, I kept my composure. When Verity called to needle me about being irrational, I bit my tongue and let her speak. When Nolan emailed spreadsheets and projections, I responded politely but non-committally. They believed I was bending. They believed I was one step away from surrender. But really, I was waiting. Waiting for the right moment to strike. Some nights, as I prepared, doubt crept in. I'd hear their voices in my head. You're too weak, too fragile, too emotional. The words clung like shadows. But each time, I opened the binder, touched my father's steady signature, and reminded myself of the truth. My parents had trusted me for a reason. They had seen strength where my siblings refused to. And this time, I wouldn't let that strength go unseen. I pictured the moment in my mind again and again. Nolan leaning back with his smug grin, Verity sighing with feigned pity. And then silence, as the witnesses stepped in. As Mr. Ashford opened the folder. As my voice, steady and firm, declared what they had tried so hard to silence. That vision carried me through. The house, once a place of aching memories, began to feel different. No longer just a relic of what I'd lost, it became the stage for what I was about to gain. Each creak of the floorboards, each faded mark on the walls whispered encouragement. I wasn't just preserving bricks and mortar. I was preserving dignity. When the call finally came, Nolan insisting on a final meeting to settle things, I didn't flinch. I agreed readily. My voice calm. Come by the house. We'll resolve this once and for all. They thought it was surrender. But it was preparation. I hung up the phone, my heart racing, and began making the calls to my witnesses. The pieces were in place. The binder was ready. The truth was on my side. All that remained was to let them speak their arrogance one last time before I silenced them with the decision they could no longer deny. All that remained was the right moment. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a gray Saturday morning when Nolan called, his voice sharp and impatient. Enough stalling, Leora. We're coming over today. Verity and I have the paperwork finalized. It's time you signed. I didn't hesitate. Come by this afternoon, I said calmly. We'll settle everything. There was a pause, as though he hadn't expected me to agree so easily. Finally, he muttered before hanging up. I set the phone down and let out a long breath. The moment I had been preparing for was here. I spent the morning tidying the house, not because I cared what they thought, but because I wanted the space to reflect the dignity it deserved. I polished the table, lit a few candles, and placed my binder neatly in the center. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh coffee, a quiet contrast to the storm I knew was coming. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Nolan barged in without waiting for me to answer, Verity trailing behind with her usual dramatic sigh. Let's get this over with, Nolan said, dropping his briefcase onto the table. Sign the papers, Leora. The buyers are lined up, we're wasting time. Verity gave me a pitying smile as she removed her gloves. You'll thank us later, darling. This house is far too much for you. It's crumbling. You'll only exhaust yourself trying to keep it up. I glanced at the paperwork, Nolan spread across the table, bold black letters, signature lines waiting for my name. Their confidence was palpable, almost suffocating, but I felt calm. I told you, I said evenly. I'm not selling. Nolan laughed, a sharp bark that filled the room. Don't be ridiculous. You don't get to decide this alone. That's where you're wrong, I replied, sliding my binder closer to me. He narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? Before I could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Nolan and Verity turned as Aunt Celeste entered, her expression steady, her presence dignified. Behind her came Mr. Carter, his weathered face calm but firm. And last, Mr. Ashford stepped into the room, his folder in hand. The color drained from Verity's face. Nolan's smirk faltered. What is this? Verity demanded. I stood slowly, meeting their eyes with a steadiness they hadn't seen in me before. You've told me I'm too weak to decide. That I'm sentimental, fragile, incapable. But today, I'm making my decision with witnesses. Nolan scoffed. though his voice lacked its usual bite. Witnesses? What, you think parading them in here changes anything? Mr. Ashford stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. It changes everything. Your sister is the legal owner of this property. These documents prove it. She doesn't need your consent to keep the house. And today, she will state her decision formally, in front of witnesses who can attest to it. Verity's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Nolan turned pale, his jaw tight. I opened my binder, my hands steady, and pulled out the deed. The familiar signatures of my parents gleamed at the bottom. I laid it on the table, letting the silence hang heavy. This house is mine, I said clearly. I will not sell it. I will preserve it, honor it, and protect it. That is my decision. The room was still. Every eye fixed on me. Mr. Ashford nodded. It is legally binding and now formally declared. With these witnesses present, no one can claim otherwise. For once, Nolan had no quick retort. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only shock. Verity wrung her hands, her pity replaced with something else, fear. I looked between them, my voice steady. You thought I was too weak to decide, but I've made my decision. And you can't silence me anymore. I didn't sign, but I promised them an answer soon. If they wanted an answer, I would give them one. For years, my siblings had filled every room with their voices, drowning mine out until I nearly believed I had none. But now, with Aunt Celeste, Mr. Carter, and Mr. Ashford standing firmly at my side, the silence belonged to me. Nolan recovered first. He slammed his palm on the table so hard the papers jumped. This is a stunt, Leora. You think dragging a few people in here makes you strong? This doesn't change the fact that we're all heirs. You can't just take this house for yourself. Mr. Ashford's calm voice cut through Nolan's fury like a blade. Actually, she can. The deed is clear. This property was left to Leora solely. The moment both of your parents passed, ownership transferred to her and her alone. You may have believed it was shared, but your belief does not alter legal fact. Verity blinked, her face paling as she leaned toward the papers spread out before us. That can't be true. Dad wouldn't. I slid the document closer to her. He did. Both of them did. They trusted me to carry this house forward, and I will. Her hand trembled as she traced the signatures at the bottom, recognition flickering in her eyes. She knew our parents' handwriting as well as I did. This was no forgery. This was truth. Aunt Celeste spoke then. Her voice steady but sharp. I watched your sister care for your parents day in and day out while you two were nowhere to be found. She earned their trust, and she's honoring it now. Do not stand here and call her weak. Nolan bristled, his face flushing red. But he said nothing. Mr. Carter, arms crossed, added, I was here too. I saw who carried the burden when times were hard. It wasn't you, Nolan. It wasn't you, Verity. It was Leora. Their voices, steady and firm, filled the room that had once felt like a cage for me. Suddenly, I wasn't standing alone against a tide of scorn. I was standing at the center, the tide breaking against me. Verity tried one last time, her voice wobbling between pleading and pity. Leora, think about what you're doing. This house is too much. You'll crumble under the responsibility. You always do. I met her gaze without flinching. No, you crumble when things get hard. I endure. That's the difference. Her mouth snapped shut. I pulled out the stock certificates next, laying them carefully beside the deed. And it's not just the house. Dad left me the majority shares in the business, more than half. That means no decision can be made without my approval. Nolan's eyes widened, his confidence faltering for the first time. That's not, it's true, Mr. Ashford interrupted smoothly. Legally filed, legally binding. Your sister holds controlling interest. Which means, Mr. Nolan, you've been playing at running the business while doing so entirely under her authority. The shock on his face was almost satisfying. For years he'd strutted about, boasting of deals and decisions. mocking me as though I were incapable of understanding. And all the while, he'd been standing on ground that belonged to me. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but unshakable. You said I was too weak to decide. But the truth is, I've already decided. I'm keeping this house. I'm protecting this business. And there's nothing you can do to change that. The weight of my words hung in the air, undeniable. For once, Nolan had no quip. Verity had no sigh. The cousins weren't here to snicker in the background. It was just me, my evidence, and the truth. The witnesses nodded, affirming what they had heard. Mr. Ashford closed the folder with a soft thud that sounded final, like a gavel striking wood. The power that had been stripped from me for so long had returned, not in shouts or arguments, but in clarity. I straightened, my heart steady. This decision isn't just mine, it's recorded, witnessed, and sealed. You can't dismiss it. You can't override it. You can't silence me anymore. Their faces told the story I had waited my whole life to see: shock, disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization that they had underestimated me for the last time. They thought it would be another chance to bully me. They were wrong. They arrived smug, ready to corner me again. And now, they sat frozen. My words, backed by law and witnesses, had stripped their confidence bare. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the seconds of their disbelief. Then, Nolan exploded. "This is a trick," he barked, shoving the deed back toward me. "You think one piece of paper makes you queen of the castle? This isn't final. We'll contest it in court. We'll drag this out until you're begging us to sell." Mr. Ashford leaned forward calmly, resting his hand on the document. "You are, of course, free to waste your money trying. But I can assure you, Mr. Nolan, this deed will stand up to any scrutiny. It was properly drafted, notarized, and filed. You have no claim." Nolan's face turned crimson, his fists clenching on the table. I had seen this anger before. He wielded it like a weapon, using volume and bluster to silence opposition. But this time, it didn't work. Because this time, I wasn't alone. Verity tried a different tactic. She leaned back in her chair, her voice trembling with feigned sadness. "Leora, we're your family. Is this really what you want? To stand against us? To humiliate us in front of outsiders?" Her gaze flicked toward Aunt Celeste and Mr. Carter. Aunt Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Humiliation? No, Verity. What's humiliating is how you've treated your sister all these years. She cared for your parents when you wouldn't. She carried the responsibilities you abandoned, and you repay her by calling her weak?" Verity flinched, her cheeks reddening. For once, her dramatics found no audience. "Mr. Carter added, his voice steady as stone, "I watched her keep this house alive. I watched her fight for your parents' dignity. If you call that weakness, then you don't know the meaning of strength." The room went quiet again. I looked at my siblings, their defenses crumbling, and felt something I hadn't in years: control. "You say I'm weak," I said softly, my voice carrying through the silence. "But weakness is selling everything our parents built for convenience. Weakness is running from responsibility. Weakness is mocking the one person who's kept this family together." Nolan slammed his chair back and stood, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You'll regret this, Leora. Mark my words." I stood too, meeting his eyes without flinching. "No. The only thing I regret is letting you make me doubt myself for so long. That ends today." Mr. Ashford gathered the papers into his folder, his movements deliberate, final. "Your sister's decision has been made, witnessed, and recorded. You may not like it, but it is binding. The matter is closed." Verity looked as if she might cry. But for once I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't shrink back. Didn't apologize for hurting her feelings. I let the silence stretch, heavy and undeniable, because this wasn't about feelings anymore, it was about truth. For years, they had told me I was too weak to decide. But today, in front of witnesses, I had decided and they had no power to undo it. Their outrage meant nothing. Their dramatics meant nothing. Their voices, so loud and commanding for so long, finally meant nothing. The decision was mine. And when I spoke, the room went silent. I told them my decision clearly. I had spent weeks rehearsing this moment in my head, but when it finally arrived, I didn't need a script. The words came easily, steady as a drumbeat. "This house stays," I said. "It will not be sold. It will not be parceled out for profit. It will remain in this family as long as I live, and I will take care of it because that's what Mom and Dad wanted." Nolan froze mid-step, his fists still clenched. Verity blinked rapidly, her painted smile twitching as though she couldn't quite believe her ears. "And the business," I continued, sliding the stock certificates forward so they caught the light, "is under my control. I have the majority shares. That means I decide what happens to it. If you want to be involved, it will be on my terms." The words were final, not up for debate. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. Ashford nodded approvingly, his voice calm but firm as he spoke to the room. "You've all heard your sister's decision. It is both legally valid and now formally declared in front of witnesses. No amount of shouting, guilt, or manipulation can change that." Aunt Celeste's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Mr. Carter gave a small nod of approval, his presence like an anchor. But my siblings weren't ready to surrender. "You don't know what you're saying," Verity whispered, her tone more pleading than I'd ever heard. "It's too much, Leora. You'll bury yourself in the upkeep of this place. You'll ruin the business with your softness. I'll do what they trusted me to do," I cut in sharply. Her eyes widened. She wasn't used to me interrupting her, wasn't used to my voice cutting through hers. Nolan laughed bitterly. "Do you really think you can handle all this alone? You've been sheltered your whole life. We made the hard decisions while you just hovered in the background." My temper flared, but instead of exploding, I stood taller, letting the weight of the truth steady me. "No, Nolan. I was the one making the hard decisions, while you pretended to. I was the one managing the bills, the medications, the endless hospital paperwork while you stopped by for an hour and acted like a savior. I was the one sitting beside Dad when he couldn't walk, holding Mom's hand when she cried, keeping this house running when you couldn't be bothered. Don't you dare tell me I don't know how to handle responsibility." His mouth opened, then shut again. For once he had no retort. Verity's lip trembled. "But why would they choose you?" "Because they knew me," I said softly. "They saw the strength in me that you refused to. They trusted me because I had already proven I could carry them when they needed me most." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the sound of the wind rattling the old window panes. "Mr. Ashford's voice broke through at last. "This isn't just sentiment, this is law. Your parents entrusted this estate and this business to Leora, and today she has asserted that right. You can accept it, or you can waste your time and money fighting a battle you cannot win." I looked at my siblings then, meeting their eyes one by one. For the first time, neither of them looked down at me with pity or scorn. They looked at me with something closer to fear or maybe respect. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that they finally saw me. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice like iron. "And I won't repeat myself." Their faces twisted when they realized they had no power to stop me. The protests began immediately. The moment my words settled, Nolan and Verity erupted. It was like watching cornered animals snarling, clawing, desperate to claw back the ground they had lost. "This is unfair!" Nolan roared, pacing the length of the room. His hands waved wildly as if sheer force of movement could undo the ink on the page. "Dad would never have left you in charge. You don't know the first thing about business, Leora. You'll drive it into the ground." Mr. Ashford didn't flinch. "Mr. Nolan, your father did precisely that. His signature is on these documents, filed and recorded years ago. You may not like his choice, but it was his to make, and it was made." Nolan spun toward him, fury blazing in his eyes. "And what about us? We're his children too. We should have a say." "You do," Mr. Ashford said evenly. "You have the right to participate in the business if Leora allows it, but the controlling interest belongs to her. That is the law." Verity's voice cracked as she jumped in, tears brimming in her eyes. Leora, please. Think about what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart. We're supposed to be in this together, not standing on opposite sides. Don't let outsiders, she gestured angrily at the witnesses, drive a wedge between us. Aunt Celeste leaned forward, her voice sharp. Don't you dare blame this on outsiders, Verity. This wedge has been here for years. You and Nolan hammered it in every time you called your sister weak, every time you silenced her. If the family is fractured, it's because you treated her voice like it didn't matter. Verity's face fell, her tears turning to trembling lips and downcast eyes. Nolan wasn't finished. He stalked back to the table, jabbing a finger at me. You don't know what you're signing yourself up for, Leora. Taxes, repairs, upkeep, it'll eat you alive. And when it does, don't come crawling to us. I straightened in my chair, meeting his anger with calm. I've already carried more than you realize. While you were busy counting profits, I was paying medical bills. While you were talking about repairs, I was fixing the leaky roof with Dad. I'm not afraid of hard work, Nolan. I've been doing it my whole life. The room went still. His words, meant to intimidate, had only given me the chance to reveal my strength. Mr. Carter finally spoke, his voice slow and steady. I watched her. I saw her up at dawn, keeping this house alive. I saw her drive your parents to endless appointments. If she can carry that, she can carry this. Don't fool yourself otherwise. Nolan faltered, his face twisting as though the truth itself was an insult. Verity tried again, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. But Leora, don't you get tired? Don't you ever feel like you're not strong enough? I let the question linger, because it was the one they had always thrown at me. But this time, instead of shame, I felt clarity. Yes, I said quietly. I get tired, I get overwhelmed, I cry when no one is watching. But strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. And every time you pushed me down, I stood again. That's strength. That's why Mom and Dad trusted me. Her tears finally spilled, but she didn't argue again. Mr. Ashford closed the binder with a decisive snap. You've heard her decision. It is witnessed, recorded, and final. There is no further debate. For years, I had been drowned out by their voices. But now, every protest they hurled crumbled against the wall of truth. Their anger, their tears, their accusations, they were powerless against the ink on the page and the witnesses who had seen it declared. I sat back in my chair, my chest steady, my voice strong. You can keep calling me weak, if it makes you feel better, but it won't change the fact that this is mine. And for once, you can't take it from me. The room was silent again, the weight of defeat settling on my siblings' shoulders. For once, their voices couldn't drown me out. When the shouting stopped, I was still standing. For the first time in my life, the silence in the room wasn't a punishment. It wasn't the silence of being ignored or dismissed. It was the silence of power, my power filling the space they had always claimed as theirs. I rose slowly from my chair, letting the weight of the moment steady me. My siblings' eyes followed me, wary now, stripped of their arrogance. For once, they were waiting for my words. This house, I began, my voice strong, will not be reduced to a bargaining chip. It is not a number on a spreadsheet or a weight around anyone's neck. It is our parents' legacy. And I will not allow you to treat it as anything less. Nolan shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched but his voice silent. Verity dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue, her usual composure shattered. I stepped closer to the table, placing both hands flat against the polished wood. From this day forward, things change. No more belittling. No more dismissing me. If you want to be part of this house, you will respect it and me. That is the first rule. Aunt Celeste nodded approvingly from her seat. Mr. Carter crossed his arms, his expression stern, as though daring anyone to challenge me. I continued. Second, the business. I hold controlling interest, and I will exercise it. If you want to remain involved, you will operate with transparency. No more backroom deals, no more arrogance. Every decision will go through me. If that bothers you, then you're free to walk away. Nolan's face darkened, but he didn't speak. His silence was louder than any protest. Third, I said, my gaze shifting to Verity. Respect in this family is not optional. You've spent years mocking me, treating my voice as background noise. That ends now. If you want your children to be part of this family, then you'll teach them better. They will not inherit your condescension. They will learn that every voice matters. Her lip trembled, but she nodded faintly. I straightened, looking between the two of them. These are the rules: respect, transparency, dignity. If you cannot abide by them, then you will have no place here, no seat at this table, no claim to this legacy. This isn't a negotiation. It's the new reality. The words hung heavy in the air. My siblings sat in stunned silence, faces drawn and pale, the certainty they once wore like armor stripped away. For years, I had bent to their will. For years, I had played the quiet one, the weak one. But no longer. I had found my strength, and I would not surrender it again. Aunt Celeste broke the silence, her voice firm but warm. Your parents would be proud, Leora. They always knew you had this in you. I knew it too. It's about time your siblings did. Mr. Carter gave a small nod. About time indeed. Their words settled over me like a shield, bolstering the weight of my own. I wasn't alone anymore. And I would never be silenced again. Nolan leaned back in his chair at last, his eyes hard but his voice flat. So that's it then, you think you've won. I met his stare without flinching. It's not about winning, Nolan. It's about respect, something you've never given me. But you will now. Verity exhaled shakily, whispering, and if we don't? I turned toward her, my voice calm but unyielding. Then you'll lose your place in this house, in this family. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't the silence of dismissal or of outrage. It was the silence of surrender. For the first time, I felt taller, stronger, unshakable. The rules were mine now, and they knew it. Their silence was the sweetest victory I'd ever known. That night, I walked through the house with a steady heart. The air was still, almost reverent, as though the walls themselves knew something had shifted. The house had always been heavy with memory, but now it felt lighter, alive with possibility. For the first time since my parents' passing, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. I felt like its keeper. The witnesses had gone, leaving behind nods of approval and quiet words of encouragement. Nolan and Verity had left too, stiff with shock. Their usual confidence replaced with silence. I knew they would lick their wounds, whisper complaints, maybe even try to twist the story in their favor. But it didn't matter. The truth had been declared, recorded, and witnessed. Their words no longer had the power to erase mine. I wandered through the house, room by room, letting each space remind me why I had fought so hard. In the kitchen, I touched the counters where my mother's hands once guided mine. I could almost hear her laugh, warm and patient, as she reminded me that strength was quiet, steady, and enduring. In the study, I picked up my father's old red pen, its cap cracked, the ink long dried. He had taught me to see beyond the obvious, to think carefully before acting. Tonight, I had honored that lesson. On the porch, I sat on the old wooden swing, the chains creaking softly in the evening breeze. This was where my parents had ended so many days side by side, content. I let the rhythm of the swing carry me, imagining their approval in the quiet air. For years, my siblings had told me I was too weak, too soft, too fragile. And for years, I had believed them, shrinking smaller and smaller until I nearly disappeared. But tonight proved what I should have known all along. Their voices were not truth. My strength had always been here, waiting for me to claim it. I thought of my father's letter, tucked safely back into its folder. Guard what matters most. He had known I would face this battle. He had known I would need the reminder that love and responsibility are not weaknesses, they are power. I raised a glass of wine in the quiet of the porch, lifting it toward the fading light of the sky. To you, Mom and Dad, I whispered. For believing in me when no one else did. For trusting me with what mattered most. The clink of glass against the wooden railing was soft but final, like a seal on the day's events. Tomorrow there would be work to do, repairs to plan, bills to sort, responsibilities to shoulder. But for once, I wasn't afraid of the weight. I welcomed it. Because the burden was also the blessing. I had made my decision, and I had made it in front of witnesses. No one could take it back. No one could twist it. No one could silence me. For the first time in years, I felt whole, strong, seen. You're too weak to decide, they said so. I made my decision with witnesses.